New World. Amazon's great big bustin' massive multiplayer online logging simulator, which launched to a fair bit of success with some 800,000 concurrent players on Steam and queues on some servers reaching up in the 20,000 area. Now, why on God's good, green, bountiful earth you would sit in a queue with 20,000 people, I will never know, and yet it happened. It very much so did. Now, this will not be any kind of a review-style video, as this is an MMO, of course, and you can't really judge it by the first 30 levels of gameplay. But I did want to do a bit of a first impressions quote-unquote video on this, since I also did one on the closed beta, where I came to the conclusion that whilst it certainly was a video game, it had a ton of video game mechanics, I considered it a rather soulless video game, without a whole lot of overly interesting things going for it, and a rather boring world. Some of these opinions have stayed the same, and some have changed a fair old little bit. Because the game has problems. Oh boy, does it have problems. One of the largest one is the fact that it insists on gating far too much of its content to either the very tippy-top most level or the absolute top percentage of the player base. Yet, with a bit more time in the game and a little bit more levels under my belt, I can quite safely say that the game does get a lot more interesting. Now, it does have a massive pacing problem, and that's probably what I'm going to be spending a fair bit of time complaining about right now. But as you get out of the really large starting areas, you start to see the game actually hitting a little bit of its stride. You start seeing new enemies that fight differently. You start seeing new attack patterns and new tactics employed by the enemy. The story starts opening up a little bit as well, and the world becomes a bit more hostile, a bit more mysterious and dark, rather than the ye olde England of the first 25 odd levels. So let's start right there, shall we, with the pacing. Now, there is a certain argument to be made here that the early levels of an MMO, particularly one as relatively rapid in leveling as the New World, it doesn't really need all that of an interesting of a base game, because everyone's going to blast through it and forget about it. It's gonna take you 2 or 3 days to get out of this place, so it doesn't really matter, but there are so many factors that conspire together to make the early game really quite draining on the player. The first is that the world itself strikes you as very goddamn boring. Initially, you wash ashore in purgatory, it feels like, and you look around to see the wrecks of ships everywhere. And there's cogs, and there's longboats, and there are triremes. It's a graveyard of empires, and you start thinking, okay, cool, there's gonna be all kinds of insane shit in this place. Then you meet your captain again, who's been turned into a red glowing monster thing. You see a giant shattered mountain off in the distance, and it seems to promise a world of adventure and glory. Then you get washed up on another shore, and you're just introduced to this weird world where, oh yeah, no, nobody can actually die here, but, you know, some people go crazy when they die, so, you should go off and kill some zombies, and you'll keep killing zombies for the next 25 levels, whilst the local populace seem to not really care. Yeah, there's zombies everywhere, and they've taken over all of the farmland, and there's aggressive wildlife, etc., but, it's a thing we deal with. It seems like just a minor inconvenience that even the people who live there are mildly just confused by. Like, yeah, there's zombies, but hey, aren't there zombies everywhere? And we can't die, so there's no real worry about the zombies, right? It all comes across as so blasé and uninteresting in many ways. When you add on top of this too, that the quests have a nasty habit of sending you to the exact same area, again and again and again, doing various mundane tasks, kill 8 enemies, loot 7 crates, kill one boss enemy, which is usually camped to hell by about 50 people, also trying to kill that boss enemy. Not the most riveting of gameplay. And when you also need to walk for 10 minutes just to get there, it starts getting rather uninteresting rather quickly, particularly also as the environment is not New Worldsy at all, not in the slightest. For a new world, it is remarkably built up, lived in, and settled. There are full-on towns everywhere. There are roads everywhere. There's huge stone towers all over the place. Like, for a new world, it seems to have been occupied and then occupied again. It's a very old new world, and the fact that it's all also just forests with wolves and zombies in them, it just is not particularly interesting. And when you take these three things together, samey quests, not particularly engaging storyline, and boring environment, along with the massive travel times requiring you to walk for hours at a time, you get quite demoralized with the game as you just trudge along to the next place and trudge along to the next place, and it feels like the only reason you're doing any of this is to simply see the bar progress without any real hope of there being something else after this. You're not really shown a glimpse at what lies ahead. You know there's no mounts in the game, so the drudgery will simply just continue as you walk slowly from one place to another across these massive yet feeling empty and uninteresting zones that are very few cool landmarks. Occasionally you can find the remnants of an aqueduct or a stone tower, but most of them aren't interactable. You can't really get all that much in the way of knowledge from them. Later on, you will unlock other things, but it takes so long. Eventually you get onto the main questline, where you will be required to get an Azot staff. This takes hours and hours of walking and walking and walking and walking and walking and walking, until finally you unlock the corruption mechanics, and suddenly the world starts changing. Dark portals starts opening, demonic entities starts flooding forth. You're not just fighting zombies anymore, there seems to be an actual tangible threat emerging in the world now. It gets more interesting. And as you eventually leave the level 25 zone and into the 26 to 35 zones, now shit's getting actually proper interesting. Abandoned little hamlets with horror-like stories. The zombies become far more threatening. They utilize different tactics. They utilize ranged weaponry. They utilize a variety of attacks. There are different types of zombies. Some are ranged, some are stabbers, some are melee, some are reminiscent of the ones you saw before. Others use magic, like sucking the life out of you. Others are literal ghosts. And some of the little key notes, and this is a big argument, a big problem I have too, by the way. In one village, the moment where I really thought to myself, this is starting to turn into something, was when I found a note describing the fate of a village. They had settled this area, and they had assumed these zombies to just be the usual zombies. Not particularly dangerous, they don't need to build any walls or worry about them. They're just mindless drones carrying out the half-remembered remnants of their old lives. But that wasn't true. These lost laid siege to their settlement. They starved them out. They used flurries of snow and storms to assault the settlement, to drag away survivors and steal food. They even used terror tactics, like lighting lights in the dark to creep them out. That's interesting. The only problem is, again, this needs to be told in a far more engaging fashion, and it's really sad too because a lot of the quests are actually fully voiced, yet you simply just click on the quest and maybe you listen to the first quest, or to the dude on the beach, the tutorial officer, but you quickly get bored because there's nothing interesting. After that, you simply just click through all the quests because you just want to get walking so you can get the goddamn XP bar growing up, missing so much of the story. It really should have taken a leaf from Sotor's book on this regard, where it drags you into a conversation, does a little bit of a cutscene, shows you some facial expressions, some animations. It might make everything far more interesting again. You say the zombies are getting more aggressive, do you? And a weird monster has appeared. That is unusual. I would like you to go scout this more, bring us back the head of this monster so we can analyze it. But sadly, it doesn't manage to get that across. Now, certainly, you could argue that in a game like this, where you're going to be done with the early zones in a day or two anyways, there's no real need to make them in-depth or overly interesting, but again, I was really hating this game for quite some time. The only thing that kept me interested was the crafting system, which I really do quite enjoy, where you can keep up with your own gear production, you can make guns and muskets and bullets, you can sell them on the market, you can make food, you can make armor, leather, you can make cloth, you can make plate, heavy plate, you can make shields, you can make kite shield, etc. The crafting system is really cool, and it gives me something to do. You can also level using crafting objectives, which is also a lot of fun and saved me from having to walk again, which was my primary reason for grinding out the crafting board every time it updated. But still, it is a motivation in and of itself. Yet, again, you do need to actually grab the players. It's all well and good to be like, okay, we're gonna have all of the content at level 60, but if nobody actually gets there because they get bored first, that's gonna be a pretty huge problem, now isn't it? And this is where we get to some of the gating of the content, which I find very annoying indeed. There is open world PvP, and you can also capture cities. The PvP is opt-in purely. There is no zones where you're forced to PvP as far as I've seen so far. You have to flag yourself and volunteer to do it, so most people just simply don't. They just get on with the grinding and the leveling. When the faction does get attacked, however, they can seize a city, and that can then be taken away from them by an invasion of other players once they have thrown the zone into turmoil by capturing the local fortress and causing a bunch of damage. Once this happens, there is a defense mechanic where 50 players on the defending team and 50 players on the attacking team are both chosen to carry out a singular PvP encounter, where 50 people fight 50 people, and the guild in charge of the city gets to select the 50 people, and the guild in charge of attacking gets to select their 50 people. So that is a grand total of 100 individuals that get to partake in this out of a server of 2,000 people. That is awful. And since you're not even ever going to experience this unless you're part of a pretty big guild that has a city, that's heavily gated content. It would be far more interesting if, okay, leave this to the guilds, right? Leave the big siege battle to them, because it's their city, they should be able to defend it however they wish, fair enough. But open up instances for everyone else, little war games, little battlegrounds that they can sign up to secure supplies, to give an advantage or a disadvantage to the defender. Free health potions, free whetstones, free supplies to build or repair towers, stuff like that. Get the players engaged in the war, other than just the open PvP, which is very, very, very easy, and in many cases preferable to outright ignore, because again, you're trying to level. You don't want to get engaged in some kind of level 25 fight over territory. You just want to get to the end game, because the game wants you to just get to the end game. It would be really nice to also just have general sign-up battlegrounds. There is a PvP battleground, but it is level 60 only, which is stupid and super lazy. Come on, Amazon. You've got more than enough money to set up servers for instances for this, surely. Let everyone participate in this combat, and the PvE invasions are just the same. Occasionally, Corrupted will attack, and you will have to defend the settlement, otherwise they'll burn it all to the ground, and that'll suck a frightening amount of wiener right there. And again, the guild gets to select 10 people, and the remaining 40 are randomly selected from all of the people who have signed up to partake. Except this too is gated to level 50s, even in the level 25 areas, gating yet further content to an even smaller percentage of the total population. for all of the things you can do in the new world, the town management, the open world warfare, the PvP, the dungeons, the expeditions, the corruption breaches, the crafting, for all of these things, the game feels surprisingly empty. It needs to have less barriers on this. Hell, I would even prefer it instead of having the current large zones. A large zone should probably be divided into smaller zones with smaller settlements. Leave the large towns for the large guilds, and then make it far more difficult to get a second settlement. Allow the smaller guilds to get in on the game and actually try and partake in all of this. Maybe even have instant settlements that are very, very small, like a private ship for your company, for example, or a private house lease so you can keep some crafting material in there. Things to open up many of these very interesting mechanics to more people rather than just the biggest and the best and the well-equipped guilds. And again, PvP instances, for the love of God, and mounts, oh god, seriously. If you want to make your early game content kind of uninteresting for people to just blast through it, don't make massive empty zones with 10 minutes of walking. Make it quicker. It would be so much preferable. Now, there is fast travel in the game, but the fast travel requires a resource, and it's also limited by your access to the territory, how far you're going to travel, and how much weight you're going to carry, encouraging yet more really slow, really uninteresting goddamn walking over vast, endless open places of boring nothingness. If your players are bored, your MMO is probably not doing as well as it could be. Hell, at the very least, maybe there could be a manual system. Maybe you don't want to have mounts, but have a ferry system from city to city. Let me pay a tiny bit of gold to ride a horse at twice the speed. At least then I can tab out and, I don't know, watch an episode of an anime whilst I'm waiting to arrive. Sigh. The new world has problems. And after getting a little bit more to grips with the dungeons, with the PvP, and with the larger scale instances, assuming I get there, right now I'm about 50-50 on whether I'll be able to get to the tippy top most levels, because whilst the leveling in and of itself is not particularly difficult, not particularly grindy or uncomfortable, I am not at all convinced that the game is going to be able to keep my attention all the way up to max level. The new world is an interesting one, but it suffers from a great deal of little niggling flaws that really should have been seen ahead of time, and a weird abundance of mechanics whilst also having a weird lack of them simultaneously. Anywho, as far as a preview goes, I will leave it there, and we'll see if I manage to soldier my way all the way up to max level. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.